find yourself a friend. Lay down your defenses and fears. You're welcome here. Yes, you're welcome here. Yes, you're welcome here.
Good afternoon. I'm Reverend Dave Thompson, and I'm really excited to bring you back to our Civil Human Bible study today. I'm a civil human minister, and so what that means is that I focus my ministry on building human peace and common ground. So in that effort, I'm looking at my own spiritual heritage to look at the teachings of Jesus, to try to find those teachings that I feel are applicable across the board to all humans, regardless of our different faiths and our different politics and our different lifestyles. I truly believe that there are beautiful and important teachings that we need to listen to, and I'm excited to bring this to you. So let's go ahead and jump into the passage today. It's Matthew chapter 23, verses 13 and 14. Starting in verse 13. But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you shut up the kingdom of heaven against men, for you neither go in yourselves, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you devour widows' houses, and for a pretense make long prayers. Therefore you will receive greater condemnation. 2 verses, but it's saying a lot. This is one of my favorite sections of Matthew's account of Jesus, because this is the first time that we really get Jesus being aggressive and in many ways antagonistic against the Pharisees, the religious leaders of his days. We're in a series right now called Today's Pharisees. This is the second part of this series today, and I'm talking about barring the kingdom, or barring the gates. This is where we get a picture of 2,000 years ago, what Jesus was accusing his religious leaders of back then. And I want to bring it across today because this message is directly applicable to us as just human beings right here, right now, 2,000 years removed. And that's what I'm excited to really bring out and to present to you today. So let's go ahead and walk through the passage a little bit. First, to set up, right now Jesus is sitting in the temple, which is their big religious building essentially in Jerusalem, the capital city. And this is where hundreds of thousands of Jewish pilgrims are gathering on Passover, which is one of their more significant holidays each year. And so they've come to offer sacrifices, they've come to do their penances, to repent for things that they need to. They're going to learn from teachers at the temple. And so Jesus is actually sitting in the temple at this moment and is teaching as one of the rabbis. And up to this point, a lot of the leaders from different sects, from different groups within the religious leadership have come and attacked him particularly. And he's done a great job of diffusing their accusations. But now we get a taste of what Jesus is going to say to them. And I want to walk through this particular section. And the reason why I put this in a series is because it really goes together. And I feel, man, it just absolutely applies across the board today to our own religious leaders and our social and political leaders as well. So what's going on in this passage? They call this the 8 woes, which is, woe, you heard at the beginning of this passage, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees. Essentially, woe is like this, word that is said at the beginning of something that's a statement of grief or a statement of disappointment or a statement of a really condemnation. So Jesus is making a point here of saying, look, pay attention to this because you guys are going to suffer as a result of this. This is going to be the end that you will face as religious leaders. And so the first one he says, woe to you, Pharisees and scribes, you hypocrites. Now, Jesus absolutely adores this particular phrase, hypocrites, and I do too, because it really speaks a lot to even our religious leaders today. Not all of them, but many of them are hypocrites. And I want to use this in the actual term that Jesus uses it. It comes from the Greek word hypokrites, and that is essentially to act. It's a stage-based term of actors who are putting on a pretense or a personality that on the surface presents one aspect of who they are, but underneath they are a different person altogether. Jesus uses this several times to talk about the religious leaders of his days. The Pharisees and the scribes are two specific groups that Jesus is talking to. The Pharisees are these sort of monks of his days. They're these people who have set themselves apart from regular society to be pure and to be holy and to live a life that is different than everybody else so that they can be pure and be an example of what it looks like to be a perfect person, whatever that is. And Jesus is also talking to the scribes. Now, scribe is sort of like a loose term for anybody who's a lawyer of the day. So remember that the religious laws of today, of back then, the religious laws are what they are governed by as a nation, not only just under religion, but as a society and politically, they are governed by the Old Testament laws that were given by Moses. And so these scribes were educated individuals who focused all of their time studying all these tiny little laws. And by this time, there was quite a length of little tiny cultural laws about where you could store your milk and whether you could eat beef and whether you could do that on Sunday and what you had to wear on Sunday while you're eating beef when it's next to the dairy. I'm not even joking. These were really the kinds of detailed and minutiae laws that they had at that time. And so Jesus is pointing out to them, look, first of all, you guys are hypocrites. You're presenting yourselves as one thing, but you're not doing that. And yesterday we saw him say, look, you guys are claiming to be good and claiming to be an example, but you don't even do what you tell others to do. You heap these massive burdens on them with all these tiny little laws. Today, however, he's hitting on two things, and these are two of the woes, if you will, in this passage. So the first one is, he says, you shut up the kingdom of heaven before people. And I want to talk about what that means. It's very specific what Jesus is saying here, and people would have understood it, and the religious leaders would have been highly offended by it, and they should have been. Jesus is pointing out to them, look, you are the ones who are educated in the law. They're educated on what is supposed to be good and what is supposed to be right. You are sort of the keepers of this and are here to help society point them in the right direction. But he says, you are closing up. This word shutting up means to close something that's open, which is, I like that term because the notion is that it's open to everybody, but somebody in particular, the religious leaders, are closing it for people. And it says closing it before them. In other words, these people are coming to this gate, if you will, coming to this entrance, and before they get there, they're being closed by the religious leaders. And Jesus says, you don't even enter the kingdom yourselves, nor are you even allowing people to go into the kingdom of heaven. We've talked about the kingdom of heaven because back in this ancient time, they saw God and all the mystical aspects, everything that was beyond their control and beyond their understanding. That was the kingdom of heaven. And so when they said, and Jesus uses this phrase, the kingdom of heaven, he's really speaking about the laws of the world and the universe and the heavens where God would preside, if, presuming that God is there, that God is up there and that God created all this and is part of this. And so therefore these rules, following these rules, will give us the best chance at living a good life and having a happy life. And these rules of the kingdom of heaven, there's two aspects of this. There's the Pharisees, and then there's Jesus' take. The Pharisees see the kingdom of heaven as this list of a ton of different rules, ways to be pure, ways to set yourself apart from everybody else, how to not be a sinner, how to not be a bad person. And then Jesus is all about doing the virtuous things. It's all about being compassionate. It's all about being merciful. He never really mentions much about purity other than to do things that are going to help you live a happy life, which in the end are good things. But instead, he said, focus on mercy, focus on helping the poor, focus on helping the needy. Instead, these teachers are closing up those gates so that people can't even get in. Many people wonder if the Bible has any relevance today, 2,000 years removed, especially in our culture where we are in a place with multiple people, with multiple backgrounds, with multiple worldviews, who have different views of God and the world. Everything is different and complicated. But these rules apply even more. Our religious leaders today have, in many ways, closed up the possibility of people coming into this kingdom of heaven, this way of having a good life. And the way that they do that here and now, they do that by requiring this long list of things that people have to do. They've got to be dressed appropriately to come to church. They've got to behave themselves a certain way. They can't be, under the influence of anything. They can't be, in many cases, lesbian or gay or transgender or bi, any of that acrostic. Anything that is different, you can't do, and you're supposed to fit in. You're supposed to sit in a row and look at the back of heads and sing songs and listen to somebody talk about something. Instead, we should be welcoming people who are looking to change their lives, people who are looking to turn their lives around, whether that's in particular a Christian expression. I would actually prefer to say people who are wanting to live the teachings of Jesus, whether that's something else. When people are trying to turn their lives around, we don't look at the condition they're in. We don't look at what we need them to be to begin with. We welcome them into our society so that we can help them become better because we have compassion. I'm saddened by many of the religious leaders of the day. I grew up in a very, very conservative and very purity-driven Christianity, which no doubt colors a lot of what I do and a lot of what I think these days. Even in that context today, there have been so many people who have had to leave these communities in the church because they can't live according to these very stringent laws. And I'm saddened to bring this point up, but it's something that I've spent a lot of time dealing with when it comes to religious figures and ministers, especially within conservative audiences. LGBTQ plus individuals have oftentimes not only been not welcome, they've been excommunicated and thrown out of their houses by the words and commands of ministers. I recently, just the other day, had somebody reach out to me and ask me what to do because they had somebody come in, who was a teacher. They had somebody who was kicked out of their house because they told them that they were gay and struggling with it. And their parents said, you're not welcome to live here. They were a Christian family. They were under a very purity-driven kind of religion. And I can't help but see the comparisons. 2,000 years ago, when the Pharisees were making sure that people were absolutely perfect the way that they defined it before they could even be part of society. And yet we have the same thing today, here and now. The message of welcoming people into our community to help them become better, having compassion, those are messages that we need today. And the second one is this, the one that Jesus, second woe, he says to the Pharisees. He says, you devour widows' houses and under the pretense of long prayers, and you're going to have greater condemnation. Now, what in the world is Jesus talking about here? This one was a bit of a weird one to me. I wasn't really sure when I started out. And as I dove into the Greek and as I dove into some of the cultural aspects, I really understand how disgusting it really was. And I say that because it was. By the end of my study, I was sad. I was really affected by this, more than I thought I would be. Because what he says when you're devouring widows' houses, these words, the word devour means to eat something until it's completely gone without a trace. It's this extreme communication of not just eating, but in an aggressive, almost animal-like way, taking away from something until it's gone. Widow, this term, yes, it can mean widow, as in the sense of a lady who no longer has a husband. But the word itself can be more generalized. It essentially means somebody who is without. Obviously, in the case of a widow, especially 2,000 years ago, when it was very difficult for women to find an ability to have autonomy by themselves, a widow needed to be taken care of because she was without the ability to have a husband in this culture to help her pay the bills and to help her survive. And frankly, as she is lonely, I would imagine at that point. And the word houses here, that they're devouring their houses, this word does mean dwelling, but it really means possessions or that which they hold onto as in their life, their possessions essentially. So this translates as you, the Pharisees and scribes, the people who are supposed to be teaching the law, you are devouring the belongings of those who do not have. This was one it took me no time at all to find a modern application to today. I can't even begin to list the amount of times that I've seen men and women who are in ministry, who are pastors and religious leaders of 1,000-member churches, taking away from the widows, from the people who barely have anything, and living lavish lifestyles, living in mansions, living with the designer clothes, getting their plastic surgery done, having the nice car, and living the great life, while on the receipts and on the money of individuals who barely have anything at all, and were giving it because they felt called by God to do that. Obviously, the whole point of giving is so that this money goes to other people who need help. But even today, in our religious communities and our social communities and our political communities, we have individuals today, individuals in government, who are taking the very difficult taxes that it is, the burden of taxes on individuals who are having a difficulty trying to make ends meet, that they use this money to make their own pleasure, to enjoy their own luxury, to do their own thing, even though they've got plenty of money to do it with. They'll use tax dollars to do that, the money from those who are doing without. And in the church, so many times I've seen ministers and on TV, evangelists, I'm sure you've seen them also. They come on TV and they say, give until it hurts. And I mean, they actually say that, all while they're sitting in absolute luxury, spending this money on their own privilege. And Jesus says to the Pharisees, and you do this under the pretext of the fact that you are saying a long prayer. In other words, back then, the widow would give her money, hoping that the Pharisees, the religious leader, would pray for her so that she would have a way to meet her needs. Ironically, God may be providing the needs for them. She would give that need back to the people who are taking it from them and praying that she would still be able to meet that need. It is gross. It is saddening. It is disgusting, but I'm afraid that it has become the de facto standard in many of our religious communities. It's become the way things are done. And so people don't see the problem with it. I know this has been kind of a weighty conversation. And I know over the next couple of studies, it's going to be a little stepping on some toes and talking about things that aren't great to hear, but they're important too. And that's why I believe, even as human beings, when we come to, and I come to my own religious and spiritual background, and I look at the accounts of Jesus, I see somebody who is standing up as a human being against people who are supposed to know better, who are supposed to do better, and yet are doing incredible harms and creating incredible sufferings. And I see an example of where we as human beings can follow and do the same, to stand up against those who are taking money from those who do not have much in the first place and spending it on their luxury. It's time for us to start standing up against that. It's time for us to start pointing it out. It's time for us to be able to recognize those who are doing without and those who are suffering. I appreciate so much your time and you being a part of this study. This particular passage has been somewhat difficult for me to read, only because I'm disappointed that 2,000 years removed, we still are fighting the same types of human natures, same types of human conditions and situations. But that also means that these good stories, and it means that the good things here can also be done today, and we can have good come of it today. Again, thank you for joining me. If you have any thoughts or reflections, or you have a comment you want to put in there, please leave them in the comments below the video. I really appreciate that, and I know other people do as well. And then also, if you're on Facebook, please like the page. And if you're on YouTube, there's a little box down here that says subscribe. Please click on that so we can stay in contact with one another. Until tomorrow, when I see you again, live at noon, I want to make sure that you know that I love you. And I do hope that you choose to love yourself. It's the only love in this world that we really have any control over. And now I invite you to join me as we go about the rest of our day, loving those around us the same way. Thank you.